is everybody has a different sort of feeling about what magic is, and a different theory about how it might or might not work. And they're none's more valid than the other, really, you know. But I do want to cover a vast body of history and information. For instance, it took me 6 hours just to open the zip files that contain the books for this latest archive. I opened at least 6,000 books. It took me 6 hours just to open it all, and I was like, I didn't realize there was this much, you know. And then thinking about the other archive I have is at least as big. So we're talking like 10,000 books now. I didn't realize it had grown to that, but there is really a ton of friggin' information about magic, and it's not all the same. I want to cover things I want to cover. I want to start with prehistory, and talk a little bit about the animism groups that sort of started to coalesce just before the first cities, before, you know, the Mesopotamian settlements, and just get an idea of what animism is in a concept, in magic, and then I really want to spend a lot of time with the Sumerian kings list and talk about Enki and how all that magic came to be, and eventually it really grew into becoming what we see written in alchemy magic, and alchemy has a place in magic. You know, we talked about before in alchemy that the alchemist's firm belief was that the experiment, no matter how material it might be, you know, in the retort, that it couldn't work without his spiritual involvement, right? So there was a magic, you know, the whole process of transmutation is magic. It's turning something into something else, right? So, and that's what, you know, alchemy is. So it's got alchemy as like this core thing, because alchemy, you know, it's like it wins the prize every time. It's the thing that goes further than the others and has more science behind it. And that's the key. It's like magic has been defined in a million different ways, and I wanted everybody's opinion on how they would define it. And it's interesting when you see the influences of culture and the influences of religion and stuff over, you know, millennia, the way that it influenced things. But I do want to go through. There's a few Shawnee's here. There's a few grimoires that I want to attend to. Like we're going to definitely get pretty deep into the Picatrix and things like the Lemegeton, Solomon magic, and then of course you had later in the Renaissance you had John Dee and Abramelin the mage, those people. So, and that's really that somebody else is here. That's where pretty much everything that happened in what we call the Great Renaissance. Hello, how are you? The Great Renaissance it's called the Occult Revival, or the classic era of the occult, which happened, let's say, from 1850 to 1950. In that period, that window of time, starting with people like Blavatsky and Rasputin, and all these sort of characters that were serious about it. And then you had the writers, so many great writers. There's hundreds, literally, that exploded in that time period. So I want to go through some of those.
There's a name that it was a person in history. I want to say, was it Saint Germain? Legend has it that the guy he professed, this guy he professed himself to be immortal.
Yes, it was Saint Germain. It was the Count Saint Germain.
Okay.
Yes, and he was supposedly identified and legitimized in several different generations
Yeah,
unaged and everything.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, yeah. And there's a couple. You ever heard the story of, well, I mean, Nicholas Flamel. Nicholas Flamel, their story is something I want to talk about too. We could talk about it for no reason. This guy was the scribe. He learned how to read and write, and so he basically spent his entire life with his wife doing basically government work for the church, transcribing text upon text, right? That's all he did. They didn't make that much money, but they weren't poor. You know what I mean? They were a middle of the road, kind of maybe a little bit upper crust of the working class. If you could read and write, you were a head above, you know. But he said that he quietly said that and wrote that he achieved the Philosopher's Stone and transmuted lead into gold, right? And everybody who knew him said he definitely did. He might be one of the only ones that a majority of the people that knew anything, and that wrote anything down, did believe him. He was a pious, priestly kind of a guy and a scribe. Why would he just make that up? And the strange thing is, although it never got shown, he never proved it officially. At the end of his life and his wife's life, when all the records were, because they kept records then. We're lucky because we have records of a lot of these actual alchemists, and he, it turns out, quietly had like 9 churches built, like 6 hospitals, a couple of orphanages. You don't do that on a scribe's pay, you know what I mean? And nobody knew about it until after they died. So it was like he was pretty slick, and it's a true story. I mean, where did he get all that money to do that? You know what I mean? So it's like maybe he did transmute gold.
Flamel's story, the one that you just told me,
Yeah.
reminds me of another priest. He was written about. Actually, I read about him in this book called Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which, if you've never read it, it is absolutely fascinating reading. I actually interviewed Diane in it.
I remember.
Before we met.
Hi, Diane.
That's what I mean.
She's teaching now.
Oh, really? That's
Yeah,
my
she's,
next move. That's my next move. And the other
Yeah.
one was Elias.
Do you,
I
hold
hate
on,
that when I have a brain fart.
Hold on one second.
Go ahead.
Do you remember what was the priest's name? My love.
No, I know.
So the mystical one is this Elias character who he's like one of these people that somehow lived in a whole bunch of different eras and in different parts of the world, traveled impossible distances and stuff for that time, but all of these cultures and all these stories somehow involve him, and then he morphs into a god with the Greeks and becomes Hermes. You know what I mean? So it's strange. And then the Egyptians also. So the Hermes legend has to go back. And I have to, when I talk to Principe again, I'm going to bring it up. I'm like, you're the historian, dude, but it doesn't make sense that it would be any other way. It had to start in that Mesopotamian Fertile Crescent. It had to start in Sumer, Ur. You know what I mean? That's where it all began. Because all of their writings they had magicians, they had court magicians and stuff like that, and astronomers and stuff, so and astrologers. So it all started then. That's my contention, and that's where we're going to start basically with the more detailed looks at some of this work. But when you talk about magic, I want you guys to tell me what your definition is. The running definition. And it's actually the definition that Crowley gave and others, but he was the first one. And is vaguely the act of causing change in conformity with the will. Simple definition. And this could involve any number of ritualized or methodic lifestyle acts. Usually, most magic you encounter in any, normal literature or anthropology is going to be of the sympathetic variety. It's called sympathetic magic because basically you enact something that you want to happen, and you're hoping that it catches on. Essentially, you're hoping that real life, replicates what you've set out. So you're trying to manifest by way of thought and energy. But there's several other types of magic. There's sort of intervention magic, there's formulary magic, where you're introducing symbols, substances, words, formulas into the ether, and essentially more abruptly affecting it than you would be with sympathetic magic. And it's always considered to be the type of thing you shouldn't do. And I'm really of the belief, even though I have a great long background with it, that most magic is magic you shouldn't do. But the good kind of magic, in my view, is what we already talk about with alchemy, is the self-empowering, healing, positive energy. Magic is a whole bunch of different things, but ritualized magic or meditative, reflective type of magic, which doesn't have to be enacted in a drama or anything. It can just happen in meditation, is where you're focusing. It's essentially the same thing as a prayer, without the subjugation of asking for it from someone. You're essentially saying, "Give me the power," which is really what prayers are anyway. If you read the Bible well enough, it'll tell you that. Am I right, Shawnee?
Yep.
So
It's
it tells you don't ask for it and expect it to be given to you. You have to move. You have to do something too. You know what I mean?
it is what is now termed manifestation.
Yeah, it's manifesting.
You
So you have manifesting, right? You have transmutation,
Mhm.
okay, which is different than manifesting. It's similar but different. You have divination, which is attempting to tell the future, to predict events by any number of means. Divination can involve runes. It can involve, throwing pebbles, sticks. I mean, island nations have all sorts of weird snails, crazy stuff. Tarot cards, astrology, palm reading. These are divination practices. And then you have hands-on healing practices like Reiki and tissue massage and like acupressure and acupuncture. These are all forms of magic. And people say magic, and the general public usually thinks hocus pocus, sleight of hand, illusions, stage magic.
When I was going to school for massage therapy, we were introduced to a lot of modalities, and Reiki was actually one of them. And our Reiki professor,
Reiki's amazing.
Yeah,
I mean, it's amazing.
It is what we call in massage therapy. It's energy work.
Yeah.
And what it is really required, what is essential, is the belief. The person that you're working on has to accept it. Has to be able to.
You have to tune in.
To believe in it, because if you doubt it, then it loses. It is not as effective.
Well, it's like any spiritual practice. If you lose your intensity, your edge, you lose the zone, you lose the effect. With Reiki, I mean, we did something similar in body consciousness, where similar to Reiki, you gather the energy into your hands. You basically work the energies, work the chakras and work the energy cycles in your body together, and send them out of your arms and into your hands. And then you don't touch the person; you go very close to them, and they feel the radiating energy, right? And in body consciousness, we had an exercise that came straight out of Tibetan yoga, which, by the way, is one of the greatest books you'll ever read. I would suggest everyone own that book. It's one of my favorite books. I read it when I was a little kid and fell in love with it, and then later in life realized how amazing it really was. But it's an exercise where you do the same thing, right? But you put your hands, cross them and put them over your heart. And maybe we'll do this exercise in the next couple of sessions. And the idea is to breathe steady and allow your heart energy and your heart itself in the imagery to rise into your hands, and it creates it nurtures this energy in such a way that it's very intense, and you can almost feel your hands forming around it, and you can take that and make a ball out of it, and you know what I mean, like Harry Potter style, and feel it. If you concentrate and you focus your energy, you will really feel it. All the things that you do with when you put your hands together and rub the fingers, those strange sensations that click, your body clicks and doesn't quite get it. It's like that, and that's a form of magic. I mean, the cartoons and movies just dramatize it, and that you see the ball, but I believe that it's a real thing. And I think that people, usually do it when you're like being instructed or just trying it, you know what I mean? Like I was in that class, but we don't do it in our day-to-day lives. If all of this stuff, all of the alchemy, the more you do it, the more it's going to help you. We went heavy into breathing for a couple sessions. I bet no one's breathing right still. I know I'm not. You have to fight to do it. Breathing correctly is very hard to do, because you have to stay present enough to stay with it, and you usually can't. Unless you really have absolutely nothing to do, you're maybe driving and you're like, tunnel vision, you can sort of get into that zone for a while. But try, I challenged you guys before, try to stay present. Just say, okay, I'm going to stay present and be right here, just behind my face, and I'm going to be engaging in the moment as it happens, thinking about the next one before it happens, and riding this, guiding it, right? That's when you are automatically creating magic. That's literally living magically, when your energy moves the world around you, right? And when we're like that, we feel our best. But as soon as you get really focused and get in a rhythm and I'm gonna do it, next thing you know, you're like putting your blinker on, turning, and then you go, oh, I wasn't present. You can't stay there. It's so frustrating sometimes. When you're really trying to do it, when I had those few classes back to back, that's all it was, mindfulness and presence. Oh my God, we were all killing ourselves. We were coming to class tired, and all of us were beat to hell because we couldn't do it, and it drive you crazy. If that's the goal, man, you better set aside some time, because it's serious. Wow. So I think, and I was talking to Natalie about this, and I think that rather than trying to go through every type of magic practice and everything, I want to talk about as many as we can, because they're all valuable to know about, and the history too. I'm a history freak. I can't get past that. I think if you're going to learn about anything, you got to learn where it began and how it, developed. And I'm sure you guys know things. Jimmy, you probably know more than you think just from your anthropology. You did anthropology religion with me, so you have a good grasp of that too. And so, and I hope everyone will have a connection somewhere along the way, because it's
learning
so interesting.
Anthropology is kind of like also whenever you learn psychology, it's more than a career. It's something that helps you out in your day-to-day activities with other people.
No doubt. Well, dude, when I was in my second quarter only of my anthropology degree, I had psychology as a minor, and I had 2 classes, and it was man, this is too good. I was these 2 fields need each other, and so I immediately dropped the psychology and picked it up as a second major. So I did the 2 degrees side by side, because they were, and it was strange. I would do anthropology of religion, and then I would go to psychology, and we would be talking about archetypes and Jungian stuff. So it was so similar, and then all the cultural stuff, all the gender and diversity
when
stuff.
When you think about it, anthropology is just the results of psychology.
Yeah, it's working. It's psychology in action, essentially. Yeah, it's psychology in action. It's anthropology with an explanation, right?
Right.
Psychology is with an explanation.
And even
Yeah.
in archaeology, whenever I'm doing archaeological research, I'm like, well, what were these ancient people thinking when they came to this place? And what was this guy thinking whenever he created this arrowhead? You know,
Yeah.
how did he figure it out?
Yeah, that's what I think is. I'd like to spend time in the Sumerian, age there, the King's List a lot, because there are, and when we talk about things like the Picatrix and a couple of the first things that were ever coalesced and written down and preserved, because that stuff all came from there. Even the Necronomicon, which is a creation of H.P. Lovecraft. I mean, it's not a real grimoire that comes from, pre-dynastic times in Mesopotamia, but it's just like one. What he did was he knew his stuff, and what he did was dramatized it, gave it a side story, a backstory, and made an amazing book. I mean, there's no one who's read the Necronomicon who's not like, wow, it affects you. You know what I mean? It can't help but affect you.
I never knew Lovecraft created it.
Yeah, well, there's actually four versions of that book, and the first one that made major publication was Lovecraft's version, but then you had John Dee. And then you had the Simon Necronomicon, which is not the most recent, second to most recent, that was essentially saying, here's the real thing, is what the Simon Necronomicon supposedly does. And then you have Necronomicon spell books, a couple of them, and now you have offshoots. But it's legit. I mean, when you read the Necronomicon, if you can look past the Mardi Gras of it, or even get into it. I like the fantasy stuff, the whole mad Arab thing. I love that. It's drama. And what's good magic without drama? You know what I mean? So I love that stuff. And then you find out that it's essentially all of the gods that supposedly descended from the skies of Mesopotamia. It's Inanna, Nana, Enlil, Ereshkigal, Enki, all of those entities, and they're written in the history of Sumeria. So there were actual things of some sort, whether they were just mythology or not, I don't know, but it's hard for me to picture a population of people that are just crawling out of the Stone Age, just making all of that up. You know what I mean? Like, how do you make up spaceships landing and and people, human-like things being on the earth and swear to it? I mean, it's in document, and the Sumerians, the funny thing about them is they didn't write too much satire or myth. Most of those clay tablets were actual records. They were like, 17 bushels of wheat collected and taxed. I mean, they were very methodic about it. So why would they spend all this massive effort writing this whole King's List that, I mean, we'll talk about the dates and stuff, because it doesn't work, but in their history it somehow does. Kings ruling for 1,500 years, and longer. It's like something was up with that dating. But if you look in the Bible, it's also seen that a day is 1,000 years is just a day, right? So who knows? But suddenly, in like the late dynastic period, after the infighting wars that happened all over Mesopotamia, suddenly people started living to like 120 and 90, and they were ruling for 30 and 13 and 20 years instead of 10,000 and 7. You know what I mean? So something happened there. The Magick side story of it is that Enki, who's the god of many things, was a god or an archetype of many things. The flowing rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, come off of his shoulders. He wears a magician's hat. He was the deity of learning, knowledge, regeneration, alchemy, etc. So it was all those things, and in the grimoires, Enki is spoken of as the master of all magicians, of all magic. So he's essentially the same character. Take away the rivers, as Hermes was, as Hermes the Greek god was, and as basically every marker that we have in our history of what gods are, they always appear this one entity that's different. who does different things. And Enki, the story that the Sumerians tell is that Enki was the one who befriended. He had a soft spot for humans, so he befriended the humans, and rather than treating them as slaves, he had helped in the genetic experiment that supposedly gave our brains the giant leap that we got. And this is the story. Whether it's true or not, it's up to you. But and so when it came down to it, and there was pressure from both sides, Enki sort of slipped some deals to the humans and made them smarter. We traded our extreme long life cycles for wisdom. That's the trade. That was the trade-off. And the Garden of Eden, when the innocence was lost, that initial fall from grace, that was the same thing. God in the Bible, God tells, basically states that, okay, Adam, you're going to die in a day, right? So Adam died within 1,000 years. Well, those time periods got squashed down once the deal was made to make humans more like God, and that's how that story is written. So whether it's true or not, who knows? But there's a genetic factor that we'll definitely get into, because Magick is epigenetics fully. I mean, anything having to deal with longevity, with healing, with energy centers of the body, with mental focus, with brain power, the power of the mind, is a factor in a magical equation somewhere, essentially. So there's a lot to like discover there, and I still, I've gone over this stuff so many times over the years, but every time I hear something more, every time a little something else, a subtlety slips in, and I go and I understand more. And that's just like with alchemy, that's the way. Isn't that the way all spirituality is? Mainstream religion just really tried to simplify it and like make it straightforward. But the mystical religions and the magical religions, earth religions, all of the cultures, the pantheon-based cultures, or going even further back to the earth animism, and object-based belief systems. That's what they were always trying to do, is pin it on something so that they could, they could rely on this whatever it is, object, God, demigod, hero, whatever, to come through. Like that allows you to sort of file everything into a place that makes sense, and my belief is that all spirituality, really, religion, spirituality, esotericism, is all geared towards the same thing. It's geared towards a transcendent state. It's geared towards, in some way, superseding the human condition, right? It's uncovering whether, whatever possibility of extension of life, afterlife, other life, you know what I mean? The continuation of the conscience, essentially, the self, beyond the body. Whether that's living forever, living for a long time, the alchemists wanted to find the elixir, or whether it's assuring yourself a safe afterlife, a pleasurable afterlife, or just the vision, that the images and attitude that you have about what happens after this. Because humans, I think it's a survival mechanism. Humans cannot possibly cope with the idea of believing that there's nothing after this. It would make this life seem pointless somewhere. It'd be like, we did all this so just that it can end in 70 years or whatever, 60 years. That doesn't make any sense. It makes more sense that something else is waiting for us, right? We're working up to something, right? It's not just working up to conk out, you know what I mean? It doesn't seem like a logical thing to me. And I think that's, the prevalence of that belief, and why you have so many really wild iterations of religious belief, that through the ages. There is some wacky stuff out there that people believe. And look at all of the the cult type leaders, the Jim Joneses of the world. How do people get duped into that? You know what I mean? But they do because they need it. You know what I mean? They need it. You and I might not need it, but they did, and he had said just the right thing. You know what I mean? Like it's a really strange thing. And there's in California, like where I'm from, there's several like large, very well financed groups out there that are pretty out there, man. And then there's I mean there's several like, pagan groups. They're docile, but there's everything out there, and there's so many weird things. And you know, of course, you have whatever Dianetics. What is the? I always forget it.
You got it, Dan.
Yeah, I mean,
L. Ron Hubbard.
yeah, that's just insane.
Scientology?
Yeah, Scientology. If you walk down, yes, if you walk down Hollywood Boulevard, they have a giant, like 3-story building on the corner of like, I don't know, it's close to La Brea on Hollywood. It's a very, you know, obvious street corner, and they're just out there like Jehovah's Witnesses essentially, but on the street, haggling, drag you in and sit you down in a room and you try to convert you. They're serious, man. And then they got this big gigantic mansion where nobody should ever have the right to have a mansion, like perched in the mountaintops in like the most pristine, you know what I mean, spot. It's like, come on, man, somebody owns that, like tear that down. That shouldn't be allowed to be there. You know what I mean? It's so strange. But you know, look, they're really rich. I mean, and look, I sent you guys some videos. I don't know if I sent them to you, Shawnee, or not, but the one, yes, I did. The ones that showed the oldest like standing. Yeah, amazing, right? I mean, somehow, and you know, with all this crap that happened throughout history and all the beatdowns, it's pretty amazing to find all these, you know, structures and basically doctrines and groups still pretty strong. I mean, you have the Theosophical Society that was started by Blavatsky, Helena Blavatsky, back in what, the 30s or something, not even the 20s, is still around. They have many you know, outposts all over the world. They have, I think, I want to say 30 or something in the United States alone. Almost one in every state. It's amazing. And they're like really nice campuses with, you know what I mean? They're well taken care of. And they're still doing their thing. So what they're doing, I'm not entirely sure. I've never been a member of the Theosophical Society, but I have been a member of several other groups, which will be some of the stuff I want to share with you guys because I can. And I'm sure that you'll find, at least I hope that you'll find some of that stuff interesting. You know, I've been a member of the OTO. I've been a Freemason. I worked with and in around the AA at a time, you know, the Argentinian Maelstrom, when they were still a breakaway group. And I've gone through the whole Golden Dawn gamut. So I can, you know what I mean? I know what it's like and what they're really about. And it's some pretty interesting stuff. And it's vital to the story of Magick. But to go on with the types, so divination, we went through that. And divination is far-reaching. It's the I Ching. It's so many different things. And then you have things like necromancy, which is giving life to the dead and communicating with the dead, sort of, you know, blended in with that. And then you have the physiological phenomenons like poltergeists and things like that people have reported. Whether they're true or not, I don't know. I've been an occultist for a long time, and I've never seen one. You know what I mean? Just like I've never seen a real possession. I mean, the closest thing to possession I've ever seen was my grandmother. And I mean, I would have to say, if there is possession, that was possession, but it really wasn't possession. It was just psychological mayhem that was happening. You know what I mean? And that really is where my belief that the idea of demonic forces and evil energies and stuff like that is, those things they exist, but they exist in the psyche, in the deep mind, and you know, the dark recesses that we sort of don't want to pay attention to if we can avoid it, right? Those are the demons, you know. And so all of this mythology that, you know, the 9 gates of hell and, you know what I mean, 72 demons, you know, all that stuff, that's all allegory. It really is. I don't think anybody, except for maybe a handful in the scope of things, of zealots that actually think that. Like there's demons like hobbling, jumping around us, waiting to dive down our throats and take us over any minute. Like that you know what I mean? Like I'm an occultist. I want to believe in all of the stuff that's mystical and spiritual and weird. Believe me, I want to believe in UFOs. I want to believe in ghosts because that means we live on, right? I want to believe in hauntings. I want to believe in poltergeists. All of that stuff. That would be great for me. It would make business great for me. But I don't, because I've been doing it for 30 years and I've researched every case I could find, and I've had people blasting in my face, for years at a time with all these stories, and they were mostly all bullshit, to be honest. They were mostly all whack job stuff. I mean, and no offense to those people, we've all been there in our own ways, you know what I mean? But, I've never seen a ghost. And I think, honestly, that if anybody would have seen one, I would have seen one. You know what I mean? I've had every possible opportunity to see a ghost, and I have not. I've seen apparitions, things we call shadow cats and stuff, that sometimes I believe those are the things that, like, Native Americans and First Peoples, when they're living out in the darkness at night and stuff, I think that they conjure those things up, and that's where ideas like the skinwalkers and the little people and stuff comes from. I mean, if you go back far enough in history, you're going to find cultures that believed in that, in little people and gnomes and fairies and all that stuff. It was, what I mean, at certain times in history, pretty common, and so all that stuff sort of bridges through magic and barrels through it with the, like a tornado. But so I think like next week, but I want to start with basically like before. Like the Penobscots and the Mandans and the early Indian tribes that we know settled in North America. And then we'll just work our way down to the Incas and Aztecs and Olmec, Mayans, and all that stuff, and come back up and we'll go through Sumeria. I mean, Sumeria has to come first because, I mean, half of the stuff that's in the, the serious books on magic historically comes from there. The stories are the same, just like most religious texts. The stories are the same. Gilgamesh is the same story as Noah. You know what I mean? It's just carried through, and there's always an archetype that carries through. And I mean, our archetype is obviously going to be Hermes in its many forms. So we're going to follow Hermes into the magic realm. It wasn't always that way. I mean, the Greeks, they didn't really look at their belief structure as magic per se. Magic was still something that, like, exceptional people did in private, sort of. You know what I mean? And it was kind of not appreciated because, they didn't like anybody being able to control anything. You know what I mean? So, but, the Caesars all employed sleazy people to do magic for them, and, Caesar Augustus wouldn't do anything without his astrologers telling him what was going on. He killed some astrologers. His way of screening an astrologer was to take them to a cliff and ask them a question. And if they can answer their question, they don't have to fall off the cliff. And the story is funny. The astrologer that wound up being his personal astrologer for the rest of his life was there at the cliffside with him, and he said, "What do you see?" And after a time, he said, "I see that my life is in imminent danger, and I know not what the cause." And Caesar was like, "You're hired," And so there's a lot of funny anecdotal stories like that all through the history of magic. That's why magic is so much fun. That's why when I sort of left, the flock and whatever, and started to look into belief as a philosophical and like a path, a quest, was up to me. I found it so uplifting and like refreshing to have a story that had two sides. You know what I mean? A story that wasn't one way, or you go to hell, or one way, or you know what I mean? Or you're gonna, I mean, I don't know. The Abrahamic religions make sense when you look at where they came from, which is essentially Hebrew, ancient Hebrew documents. But they're also just exclusionary of the Hebrew texts on magic that existed back then, because many did. You know, and today, even as the hardcore Hasidics and hardcore Hebrew Jews, their older men and some of their women are highly regarded as magicians, as powerful people that can actually make things happen with their influence and their mind. Right?
Kabbalism.
What?
Kabbalism.
Yeah, Kabbalah. And I mean, from Kabbalism, and then generations later, we have the Kabbalah, which is a more elaborate, intricate mapping of the same principles. I mean, and we're going to have to go through that. We'll go through that probably when we hit Crowley and stuff, because he did enough work in there, like Golden Dawn. Talk about the Sephirim and what they all mean. You know, there's 10 Sephiroth, which are like idea balls. They're factors of existence and growth in life. Kabbalistic tree of life. And the comparisons we've already drawn in some of our first alchemy sessions between that and the chakras and the caduceus and all of that. That number 7 is just always going to be there, and in magic it's really prevalent. So that's it, and then hopefully someday we can all like reach more current times, because you know, I think what's happened in the realm of magical writing, magical religion writing, essentially, with what we call neo-paganism, or the archaic revival, which is essentially the re-emergence of all the old folk religions, Celtic religion, Druidry, Saxon Wicca, Celtic Wicca, all of those things, Germanic, all coming back, Gillian's, all coming back to life, because, you know, and I think Margot Adler probably said it the best when asked, like, why do people do this? Why are they interested in all this stuff? Hold on. And she said that she thought that it was because people wanted to bring back the meat, you know, the meaning in their lives. And hey, what's up? Aiden, what's going on? And I mean, Terrence McKenna said the same thing. How you doing? Terrence McKenna said the same thing when talking about alchemy. He said, you know, alchemy won't die because as soon as the Renaissance started to take hold, you know, the people were sort of released from the strict structures that the Dark Ages were, and allowed to think, and, you know, encouraged to think and use reason and explore and learn. And so they went by instinct. You go back to the last thing that made sense, right? The last thing before the Dark Ages. What the hell was going on? What did we believe back then? You know what I mean? And they were like, get the alchemy. You know, bring me Plato, but first bring me Hermes. You know, and that was really the story, because people, you know, that was very powerful. I mean, and it's still plastered all over the sides of temples and all of the cathedrals in Europe, plain as day, right to this day. You'll see some of the strangest pagan art and carvings, and clearly pagan. I mean, some of it is like an exact replica of things you'll see in books on paganism, all over the churches. Usually right under the row of saints will be a bunch of shields or little frescoes, you know what I mean, that are the Green Man, like the salamander we talked about last week, and the lion, and those types of things in a pagan guise, you know what I mean? And then when you look at what happened after the fall of the Mesopotamian cities, and you jump ahead a little ways into early Egypt, it didn't take long before all that stuff was essentially revived again. Because people, I think it's an inert thing in us. It's an innate urge that humans have. We, similar to the having to believe in an afterlife, we have to reconcile that. We have to figure out what that means. Okay, if we live on, who's in charge over there? And you know what I mean? And what do we do there? And is it all the same? Do we get punished possibly? Do we get rewarded possibly? Or do we just carry on? You know what I mean? Like, we don't know. Nobody knows. And I don't even know any religious leader that claims to know. Some of them swear that things are the way they are, but they don't claim to know firsthand because they can't. You can't know. Near-death experiences are the closest things we have, and these are stories of what I think are like middle brain chemical happenings. I don't think that many people, I think probably some, but I don't think many people have actually walked through the other side, been able to browse around and come back and tell stories about it. Maybe a glimpse or two, but if you've ever had a near-death experience, which I've had a couple of them, they weren't like that. They weren't like that for me at all. I mean, I had one that I guess you could say similar with the brightness and all that stuff, but that wasn't my experience with near-death. I mean, Shawnee, have you had a near-death experience?
No.
With your illness and whatnot? No? Huh?
No.
I'm telling you, for a while there, like in the 80s, like we wanted to have one because we wanted to see that. Like, what are they? Is this true? It seemed like such far-fetched, But it's the same thing when you look at the phenomenons. It's so eerily odd the way that phenomenons happen such a similar way in places with people that absolutely have no possible way of knowing. You know what I mean? So when someone tells a ghost story from some tribe in New Guinea or something, and it's so similar to a ghost story that some maid in Louisiana told 200 years ago, makes you wonder, like, what's going on? Similar with alien abductions, same thing, And there are neurologists that will tell you that seeing aliens and going through those experiences that people describe is a neurological happening. It's actually it's a psychosis of sorts, right? Yeah.
Hey,
and I think
Don.
Yes.
Did you read The Spirit Molecule?
No, but I would like to. I probably have it in my collection. Yeah?
Yeah. The Spirit Molecule, and then
Yeah, I know of it.
And then there was a book by Graham Hancock that literally set out to prove that a lot of experiences that people would have with basically was drawing all the comparisons between the reports of angels and the reports of aliens, or the reports of demons and the reports of aliens, and how.
Yeah, and I'm not going to say, and of all the explanations and all of the examples I've seen in my history, I'd say that that's no more unlikely than any of the others. You know what I mean?
Right.
The ancient astronaut theory is not one that I think is totally without merit. I think that it has merit. It has as much merit as any of the other conjecture that we've been given. You know what I mean? Some of the
No, I agree. I have come full circle to believing that if human beings receive knowledge from other beings, like really from other beings, that it is
Anunnaki. The Anunnaki.
Dimensional way. Because of the experiments that we've done, ayahuasca, DMT, or any of those things.
Yeah.
I think there are, basically it's like there's portals in the mind. Also,
Definitely.
the body is the instrument, it's a broadcasting and receiving instrument, our bodies.
Right.
Our minds are not contained in our bodies.
You remember, what was it, our first session maybe? I was like,
Right.
you have to, picture the fact that the mind and the brain are not the same thing necessarily. They are not. One operates through the other sometimes and sometimes not. And like the brain is sort of a clearinghouse, a receptor and radiator of the mind. The mind is, and I mean, if you look at Eastern beliefs, the mind is essentially just a little outside of your whole body. It's like a force field around you.
Right.
So that's kind of how they picture the mind.
It's like that's your lane area network.
Yes. You know, you're like your Bluetooth is on. It's your Bluetooth.
Right, the gray matter, or even like the neurons that they're finding in the gut, like all those things are just the physical hardware,
Yeah.
but doesn't represent the actual message communication.
Right.
So, to me, what magic is, really and truly, to me, the practice of magic is any kind of rituals that involve material devices, maybe materials, but anytime that you are taking even the words and making vibration physical reality somehow, any of the five senses, and all you're doing is it's kind of like you're getting online. You're getting online and you're directing the force of your energy.
That's fair. That's fair.
Your mind to
Yeah, that's cool.
whatever energies need to be brought online to bring about the manifestation.
Right. And the use of symbols, or fetishes or sigils or any of that stuff is all meant to focus the mind. And I mean, if you look at, go back to freaking the Kabbalion, and the Kabbalion tells you true alchemy, magic of the magic kind, is a mental art. It stresses it over and over again.
Right.
This is a mental art. And if you talk to any of the great musicians of that occult revival I was talking about, or even a lot of the sort of fringe scientists that we've had throughout the 20th century and stuff, they will tell you that, like, it's all the mind. It's all the mind, and I believe that. And that's what I was just saying before. I believe demons are in the mind. I believe magic happens in the mind. Look, the most powerful magic. Like, do you want to play lotto with magic and work fetishes and in the dark, and bind things and try to control other things, or is it better to use all of that energy to focus and build you, right? Make yourself magic.
Oh, right.
Right?
This is my true belief, okay? When you talk about light magic, white magic, or as in my religion, we call it the light side of the force, and we turn away from the dark side of the force. Because I have come to understand that Star Wars, Marvel comic, Marvel Cinematic Universe, those are secular interpretations of what used to be the way that religions were practiced, was
Right.
mythological, Zeus, all that. Like, okay, instead of I'm trying to think of
There's always an archetypal story and an archetypal struggle and an archetypal ending. You know what I mean? That's where we got all that.
I taught a tarot class. I taught a specific grimoire. I taught the grammar of a spread called the Pyramid of Change a couple weeks ago, and I was just basically explaining that the difference between just guessing yourself, doing divination, is that we're just go through some rituals. I made put their decks in order, made them look at all the archetypes. I'm like, these archetypes are making an impression on your subconscious mind, and all we're doing is just going in your own mind.
Right, you're playing the story out.
If you look in the refrigerator itself and you can't see that damn thing that you're looking for in the refrigerator,
Right in front of you.
but then if you bring somebody else, they can see it. So I say, what you do is we're going to go through little rituals, a little meditation. We call it a prayer, we call it a spell, call it, but it's some kind of ritual where you're telling your body, you're telling your mind, now let's look up to the collective consciousness and look at, and do a spread and look at these answers with the whole of the spiritual internet, instead of just me being in the fridge and going, I still don't know the answer.
Well, I mean, and isn't that like really what the crux of like science is, what discovery is. I mean, you know what I mean? So and I mean, and that bridges into the whole idea of magic, because now you're taking your definition even further, right? Now your definition actually becomes quantum field dynamics also.
That's correct.
And also becomes chaos theory, right? And it also becomes a whole spectrum of other things. Did you know that the word pharmacy came from magic and alchemy?
Of course, because what is an apothecary? What is the apothecary except that what used to be the wise woman or the witch that we burned because she was making money selling herbs that would cure things? You know,
Right.
I mean,
Well, and for the longest time, the pharmacist and the pharmacy were not necessarily looked upon too favorably by the powers that be, because that was really pushing, taking medicines like that. It was taking out of the hands of God and stuff like that. Was not really. It was borderline like alchemy on it.
vaccine if God wants me to die now.
Whatever. But you know, but back in the old days, that they were like superstitious about it. They thought that if you were trying to affect those functions and those capacities in a human being, you were essentially you playing God, right? Playing God, and
there's still always going to be a fraction of the population who perceive things through the lens. They won't be able to make the jump. They won't even be able to understand when the science and art are just different vocabulary.
Right.
But we can't.
That's the unfortunate thing that I think is a lot of what my life's work is heading towards, is trying to end the idea that there's multiple stories and one is right and true and one is older so it's better and all of that, because it's not, none of it has any weight. If you look at the actual documents of history, that the things that are tangible that do exist, we have a record of these things. We know how they were written. They were not written by angels, or you know what I mean? It's like, can we bring this down? And I think that's what's happening. I think that's this awakening that people are talking about. It's people are they're trying to sort of revive and rework their belief systems so that they still make sense. All beliefs, including magical beliefs.
That is absolutely true for people who seek to enlighten their own minds.
Well, there's always going to be the ones that
there's always going to be people who just tell me what's good and what's bad.
Tell me, what time are we going to church?
What's good. Like, there's always people going to give away their power, and there's always people who are going to take that power. What I was saying before about the light side of the force, dark side of the force, or black magic and white magic, there's just really one defining characteristic. If I am performing magic, and it is of benefit to me, and it is also of benefit to you, that is like magic. If I am performing magic and you're performing magic with me, but the results are going to be in my best interest, not really in your best interest. Even if it doesn't enhance you, it's just like, maybe I took your money, I definitely took your time, and this is going to enrich and enhance my life, but I have corrupted my power.
And yes, and that's the point of it, okay? And that's the point of it. And really, I mean, there's many learned magicians that would say there's no difference between white and black magic. There is no white and black magic. There's just magic. And the whiteness and the blackness, or the grayness, because there's gray magic too, is based on the intent of the practitioner and what forces it draws its results from. And I always tell people when they want to do spells, I don't teach that. I'm like, I can give you 1,000 books on spells. There are 1,000 of them, and you can go and do what you want. But the way that I make the analogy is that if you do a spell, if you're bent on, you're going to make yourself wealthy, you're going to do money spells until it friggin' pays off, until the tree springs out of the ground, the money tree, and you're rich. You can probably achieve that with magic, but it's going to be at a great cost, and the cost will be far outweighing what the monetary value you will gain. So you can gain the richer you get, the worse the cost is going to be. It's always that way because the universe seeks balance and demands it. There's no getting around universal law, and everybody who's anybody in philosophy, religion, or anything will tell you that it is what it is, and that's it. And so with natural law being the case, that's why I say it's better to focus on instead of attracting things to you that are foreign to your reality, things that otherwise could not be commanded to your attention. Meet them halfway. Go get them. And change the way that you approach things, so that you're not taking from somewhere else. You're creating it. Because everything, if you're going to manifest something, you're taking it from somewhere. Taking it. If there's a billionaire, there's a penniless pauper dying in a gutter. Period. That's the way it works. Again, the balance.
So how are you are you also doing things to balance the energy, like you said, or just trying to take because the universe, like you said, then the universe will still draw from your account. You just don't know how it's manifest.
Yeah, you'll get rich by losing both of your legs in a horrible accident and getting a lawsuit.
Right. I got work.
You know what I mean? Your whole family will die in a plane crash, and you'll sue the airline. Like that's the way it'll happen. It's always that way. And from my experience, any time I've been around what we call black magic, vindication magic or like vendetta magic, which you would say probably qualifies as being considered like black magic because you're trying to do harmful things to someone else or something else. Harmful things, I would say that probably classifies as black magic, except for the fact that black magic didn't come from that. Black magic came from alchemy. It came from the dark soil of the Nile, and it was called the Chem, and the black soil, the pot of melting, merged and became black magic as people came and left and went back to their corners of the world. They took back stories of this black magic, and that's really where that name came from. So it's really not fitting, but it's fitting now. When we color it now and we say black is bad and white is good, then it makes sense. Really, really those kind of dark magics and even some of the very selfish and carnal, satanic magic is really. I look at it this way: I'm like Anubis, right? I have the scales, and the feather goes on one side and the heart goes on the other, right? If the heart of the magician is the heavy heart, then that's probably not something that is right to mess with. I'm not saying good or in your favor or anything like that. If it's not right to do, you shouldn't do it. It's a simple litmus test. You know what I mean? And I've seen it happen. Magic does not just happen because someone's cleverer with it or whatever, or does everything exactly to the book, but it does happen. I've seen things happen that I was like, wow, and then not like less than a year later, you're like, oh man, look what that became, right? People who've gotten the person that they wanted, things like that, and who've gotten the thing that they wanted, or were able to manipulate the crowd that they needed to get somewhere, whatever. That's never good. Anytime that you're putting so much of your force and your focus into manipulating other things, wouldn't you be better in manipulating yourself? There's always going to be room to improve and empower yourself and be healthier and all those things, smarter and just more powerful, right? Always. And we don't live here very long. This is a short life. I always say, but man, is it tragically short. We don't have time for that shit. Who's got time for that shit? We don't have time for violence and hatred and all that stuff. We just don't. People just are too dumb to realize we don't have time for it. So they waste their lives doing that. Thinking that way, being in that mindset of like, that that ugly competition where the ego self or the shadow self in Jungian is really that. It's like the shitty person who will do pretty much anything to get their comforts attended to. You know what I mean? And
But
to achieve something imaginary, really.
it's very, very rare for someone who is firmly in that competition principle, survival of the fittest, I can't win unless you lose mentality.
Right.
Very rare for them to cross over. It does happen. Especially people who are not born that way, but maybe family members try to make them that way. They have
Family is a very strong influence in that regard.
Yes, exactly.
In that regard, that's something where you got to throw your hands up and say, family is brutal, and culture, family and culture, oof,
Right.
man, strong
So
forces.
I think I really come full circle where I don't believe I will waste my energy trying to change people's minds. I realize like there's the saying that when the student is ready, the master appears. Now at this stage in my life, I see the masters everywhere all the time. It's more like when the student is ready, they notice that the master has been saying this for 8 years now.
Yeah. I wrote a paper recently where I said, like, you know, our parents did freaking warn us, pretty much. I mean, they didn't know quite how to say it, and we missed it, but we probably should have listened better.
Some of it, definitely.
Yeah, to a lot of it. Like a lot of it. You know what I mean? and so, like, they might not have been quite as knowledgeable as, you know, today's generations, but they were just as wise in their own way.
Well, you know what it was? Human nature hasn't changed.
I mean,
Technology has changed. The lines on the map might have changed, but human nature has not changed. So the things that they could teach us about human nature, you know, when the pandemic hit, my mom read every book she could get for the 6 months on the pandemic of 1918, and I thought that was kind of silly because of how far we've come since then.
Yeah,
but
but
it turns out that the population behaved exactly
the same. Oh yeah, if you're gonna look at social behavior, it's never gonna freaking change. It seems.
right.
I mean, I don't know what we're gonna do, and there's such a divide now. It's crazy.
Speaking of
It's scary.
human behavior and
It has to
things
happen.
that
Something has to happen. What?
Speaking of human behavior and things that you gotta watch the documentary Kiss the Ground on Netflix. Is basically just blows your mind with, like, remember the Dust Bowl and all the lessons we did about the Dust Bowl? Well, we fucking did the whole thing again, only on a global scale. So now we have to fix it. But it's a very uplifting film because it's the first thing I've ever seen that presents a legit, doable, reasonable way to well, not reverse climate change, but at least prevent some of the worst crises that we could be facing if we just, you know, don't stop doing the things we've been doing. I want to tell you that it's a compliment that I came over here because nothing distracts me when I'm working, but I was so fascinated with the topic.
And it's going to take weeks to do this.
Class, Professor John.
Yes, it's going to take weeks to do this, obviously, and we're going to have more people because I have more confirmations. I told everybody today was kind of just to see who could get together. But yes, I want you here. I made a list. I have a list, and it's got 9 people on it. No, it's got 10 people, including me. 5 males, 5 females, and all of you are on it. And I think that we can definitely have those people, because all of them have spoken to me several times, and they're like, yes. So we can get that together, and sort of once we get past a lot of the like discovery, you know what I mean, rabbit hole talking and stuff, which is going to be with Magick anyway. It's going to be fun because you know, we have people with different backgrounds, people with different experiences with it, and ideas. You know what I mean, and that's really important. So my definition, Magick. right? My definition of magic. Knowing what I know now, had I only known then, okay, it has to have more than one definition because it's more than one thing, but essentially it is the act, the process of manifesting your own field of vibration onto other things to influence them towards your will, right? This includes even surface things like glamour. Glamour, if you don't know what that is, it's essentially the power that witches supposedly have to, even if they're not, gorgeously, lavishly attractive, men still, fawn over them and will do anything for them. It's the ability to sort of command that sort of, attractive force and effect on people. If you want to influence, a situation, you can use your guile and your humor and your that kind of trickery, which is a mental thing. Again, it's psychology, charisma. Right? Yes, you're taking your charisma and you're sort of poking it and prodding and finding ways to navigate, right? And that's really magic. And the better you are at that, at like foreseeing that and being able to adapt in whatever situation, the more powerful magician you are, in my opinion. So we know now that we have the quantum field. Now it's a known thing. It's not like the ether, like the olden days, where it was like, the unseen. Now it's literally it's a thing that we know. It's a particle-based place between us. And so, when you have theories in math, even working out, like the butterfly effect and string theory and strange attractors and all those things happening at the quantum level with photons and electrons, something can't be in more than one place at the same time. But it kind of does. And it's something a million miles away from another thing can't affect it, but it somehow does. And that's that same laws of nature. The scales will be balanced at the end of the day, and that's just it. It doesn't matter if you have to die or your dog has to die or whatever has to happen. It's gonna friggin' happen, no matter what. You know what I mean? And so
I got to get back to what I was part of this, and if I can't, I'll come back.
Yes, please. Well, I'm gonna wrap it up soon, but next week we're gonna have lots of shit. I'm making slides. Excuse my language. I'm making slides now that are gonna be fun, and I'm not too many of them because I want to talk like this more. I like these. I like being able to interact and let people talk about their experiences and ideas. But yeah, the magic is gonna be so much fun, and I want to try to cover as much of what's in my wheelhouse that I can, because it's all interesting. The historic stuff is fascinating, history that is lesser known, and some of the strange twists and some of these books that we're going to look up. We'll actually go through and talk about the Necronomicon in detail. We'll talk about the King's List, we'll talk about all that stuff, and the Picatrix, Red Dragon, all those mainstay sort of books. I think if you're gonna read anything about like high magic, which is the last thing I was going to talk about, high and low magic. It's a thing in classification. High magic is usually refers to the well-dressed, intricate, involved, ceremonial practices, things that like the Golden Dawn does, that the Masons do, that are done in churches, all of that high ceremony, very methodic and to the letter, and everything needs to be done just right. The temple has to be set just right. That's high magic. It's complicated magic, essentially. And then low magic is anything you can do by drawing a circle in the dirt, and you don't need anything really to do it. A lot of people say you need all sorts of things. I've been working on an amazing wand, by the way. I don't know if you could see that, but it glows in the carved parts, and it's painted with incredible paint, but it's amazing. People think you need all sorts of implements, right? The altar is decked out, the water and the salt and the athame and the, you know what I mean? It all needs to be there, but it really doesn't. You don't need a candle. You don't need anything. And anybody who's spent their life around it like, I mean, Buckland, Connolly, all of the really the modern day pagan writers that sort of led the way say you don't need anything. That someone who's powerful in magic can draw the circle in their mind and in their space without actually making a circle, and can illuminate the magical space the same way, create the cone of power, something else we'll talk about, the same way. And it's all the same thing. It's all just like it's like what you do in meditation, except for with a direct focus on something, a procedure. Not all magic has procedure though. So some of the low magic, some of the shamanism, they have procedures, but they're not fixed like that. The shaman used to get his magic from having a non-local experience. That was shamanism. And most of shamanism, and that's something we mentioned last week, I don't know if you guys missed that, but I know Jimmy's heard it. Any shaman that's like not a bullshit artist, who really knows their history and was brought up in shamanism, will tell you that 99% of what the shamans actually do in a tribal setting or in a demonstrative setting, it's trickery. It's all little tricks. They have tricks as well. Now they do have deeper spiritual practices with healing and with seeing, divination and things like that, where they claim to have a non-local experience. This is leaving the body, the embodiment, traveling some distance, could be close distance, could be another galaxy, and they interact with a sentient intelligence of some sort that gives them a message or tells them the answer to what they're trying to do. This is shamanism. It's a communication with sometimes animal spirits, sometimes celestial spirits, sometimes just astral travel and being in a realm. So goes the story of shamanism, and then they come back and with the answer, like, oh, I saw the light, and we have to, smash 14 tea leaves, and you know what I mean, mix it with some blood, and you'll be healed. Like, that's how shamanism was, and sometimes it works, just like the placebo effect works. And sometimes they got lucky, and the medicines really were medicines. They really were. Alchemists discovered a ton of stuff that's still used and created in laboratories and chemist labs all over the world today were discovered by alchemists. For real. They weren't just, morons trying to make gold. They were coming up with chemical substances, acids, and all sorts of corrosives and protectants and all sorts of things. They created alcohol. I don't drink, but a lot of people owe a great debt of gratitude to the alchemists. They were the ones that made distilling happen. And so what other kind of magic do we have? All right, so wizardry and sorcery. And then we're gonna end for tonight and have a whole lot to think about. Wizardry and sorcery. They're essentially just terms, but to someone who has, who's counted the books, witchcraft, a witch, a sorcerer, an alchemist, a wizard are slightly different things. Not exactly the same thing. And there's subtle differences, but they're pretty clear cut. Usually witchcraft or witchery of any type generally refers to your country person. A heathen was someone who lived on the heath in the country. That's where it comes from. Pagani is the same sort of principle. It's people that live off the land, on the land, away from the structures of society. So if you lived in a house out in the woods by yourself and made your own potions and were seen, clipping funny herbs and, burning stuff, that was a kitchen witch. It was or a hedge witch, right? You'll hear all these terms. And essentially they were the brewers. They were the ones that made the brews and the tinctures, medicines and stuff. And of course, throughout time, superstition being what it is, you had all sorts of conjuring and stuff going on. But for the most part, the cauldron was just what they cooked in. I mean, the history is very funny about this. And warlock is a creation. That word is a creation of the Catholic Church. That's not even a pagan word. Some people that practice magic like that. I don't. I'd rather someone call me a witch than a warlock, because warlock is sort of like goofy to me. But sorcerer is again. This is again reflects on the intent. A sorcerer is someone who seeks to alter the course of natural processes by introducing something that he created, something foreign, either to change the chemistry of what's happening, or to a symbol, or to burn a spell in a piece of parchment, or to bury it in the yard for 9 days, dig it up, and all that stuff, of which there are millions of spells like that. That's a sorcery. That's meddling. I look at sorcery as a sort of meddling. It's not necessarily, maleficent. It's not bad necessarily, but it is a bit more of a meddling spirit that's behind it. A sorcerer seeks to sort of trick nature into working for him. You know what I mean, or her. Whereas the witch works with the nature and tries to grow the nature. It's a different thing. They try to attune with the earth, so, you know what I mean? Whereas a sorcerer tries to control it, essentially, the energy. And then a wizard would be considered essentially the higher-minded, wiser sorcerer. The wizard knows that they can achieve great things. They only do the things that are necessary. But their mindset and their path is one of healing, help, curing, ending war, fixing things. So that's really the distinction in the things. When you hear, these different terms, it's essentially what they are. And lastly, voodoo. Voodoo and the Obeah religions. The Obeah religions are literally in every corner of the earth. Everywhere there's an island or an isolated, alcove of human existence, there is some form of Obeah religion. There's all through the Spanish cultures, all over Latin America, Santeria, and every offshoot of that. And we've in America, in Louisiana and other places, you have what I call Louisiana Catholic, which are essentially voodooans who use Catholic saints and Catholic imagery, rosary, and all that sort of stuff on their altars. Yeah, it's Louisiana Catholic essentially. Although there's different versions. When you get into that Creole and Cajun, now you're really talking about like island magic. That's Barbados and places like that, far-reaching islands where those things came from. But all along the island belts of the Caribbean, all over even Southeast Asia, on the outskirt islands and New Zealand, all around, all the little islands around what do you call it, Australia, all the remote places. I mean, Bora Bora, the most remote place in the world, that's an Obeah religion-based society. Their religion is essentially sex. They originally don't wear clothes, and it's basically a free-for-all, similar to the way that Polynesia was when it was first discovered by Margaret Mead, right? Jimmy? Margaret Mead, right? Yeah.
Actually, I was just thinking about that. There's kind of a controversy, though. They think that those islanders might have lied to Margaret Mead about their sexual practices.
Well, I mean, but they did. Maybe. But there is cultures out there that's well documented where the men wear the earrings and the makeup and the skirts and sit around and tend to the house, and the women are like the dominant one. Like there's flip, gender roles and stuff like that. So I don't know. I think Margaret Mead. I tend to really like her work.
Oh, yeah,
it was criticized.
The most famous cultural anthropologist there was.
Yeah, probably.
She was actually on Johnny Carson's show one time.
Really? Yeah, a couple were. I mean, she's one of my favorites. As far as her writings, I think that her anthropological documentation is among the best. It's right up there with all the greats. It's just as good as all of the stuff that was done in the salvage era, right? Salvage era anthropology, they call it, right? We had to go find all these cultures that were dying and document them, right? The Boas salvage era, right? And really, that's when all these magics were revived. I mean, Indian magic, shamanism, the polar magicians, the polar shamans in Siberia and stuff, all that stuff. I mean, this is great fodder to talk about, man. I mean, and it filters all the way down and it becomes all sorts of subsects and stuff like that. And you get weird things popping out of it, like the what do you call it, the Mennonites and the people we have right up here. I mean, those people, if that's not an anomaly. You know, I did my capstone study up there with the Amish and the Mennonites, Jimmy. I spent 6 weeks up there with them. And,
Wow.
yeah, I mean, on and off, but I was up there. Yeah, I mean, imagine me in the Amish. Yeah. But I met.
We were having a discussion one time. I don't know if you remember, because I picked the subject of Judaism to do mine on because I didn't know anything about that religion. And I think you did the same thing with the Amish.
In the religion class, I went to the OTO temple because I knew I could. I went, and it was, and I had that class on Halloween. So I was, during Halloween, so I was like, I'm going to go to the OTO temple and go to an actual Gnostic mass on Halloween. Can't beat that shit. And so that was my religion one. But the cultural one, the capstone, the last course you took, you had to do a real study, a field study, another one. And that's what I did, because up here, it's like we have the largest Amish community on earth, just 60 miles from here, in Middlefield, right? And so I went. I actually was taking a bus to Florida one time, and usually the first bus I take will have a few Amish people on it because they, you know what I mean. They travel sort of around here, and they always look at me funny and whatnot. But this was a younger couple, and they were looking at me, and I saw them looking at me, and I was just like, whatever. And finally, the guy, there was nobody else on the bus. The guy sort of sachets over. He's like, "May I ask you a question?" And I'm like, "Sure." He's like, "Are you a witch?" He like whispered it. "Are you a witch?" And I was like, "Why do you say that?" Is that a pentagram necklace? "Well, I see the pentacle." And I'm like, "Yeah." I said, "Well, I guess I would qualify as one." And he's like, he didn't understand it because he could sense that I was not like some weirdo. You know what I mean? Like, we connected already with eyes and heads before that. So he was like, "This seems like a really normal guy, other than the hair and whatnot." But they thought, you could tell that they thought anybody into that would be a scary, creepy person that would be, you know what I mean? But he was interested, so I was like, no, and I said, there's lots of religions, and like, I choose to be sort of a-religious, and I'm a seeker, and I connect with some of these ancient symbols and ancient practices, and sort of that's where I hover most of the time. And he's like, he didn't understand how you can do that. He thought you had to pick a side, man, and that was it, and I'm like, no, and I went to we got into long discussions about where I get my morality and where I get my ethical standards and these things without, surrendering everything to Jehovah or whatever. And I just explained, well, I mean, and I always say this, I'm like, I don't care what anybody's beliefs are. They're just beliefs. That doesn't harm me. And this is a hard life. This is a freaking struggle. The struggle is real, man. And whatever belief helps you, what business is it of mine what it is? You know what I mean? As long as you're not harming me, you're not threatening my kin, you know what I mean? What do I care? Like, why would anyone care? That's the whole senselessness of religious wars and holy wars and all this crap that's happened, and the struggle for resources and money and all this crap that's based on these ideologies. Like, the ideologies are not the problem. The problem is this incessant need to victimize oneself and make the other an enemy. You know what I mean? And that's what really we have to work on. And the goddess religions are great for that, because the goddess religions, first of all, include women, with open arms as just the same level, if not even slightly higher than the male in a spiritual sense. The goddess is really the giver of life. The earth is our mother. You know what I mean? It's always been that earth mother, sky father, right? the moon is always the goddess because she has the most influence and draw on you. So really, in the ancient religions and the pantheonic religions, other than the Hellenistic and beyond, it was always goddess first. And what you had essentially was a brutal, like, overnight takeover of religion by, by paternal minded. By this was a time in history when men were like chiseled in stone or something. Like, they just didn't have time or much energy on the whole to be concerned with anything that they couldn't beat down. As long as they could beat down, trample over, and take over, that was the mode. I mean, this was the age of conquering. And women suddenly, out of nowhere, as soon as this religion shift happened, all the goddesses became secondary, became the harlots and whores of the stories, and the secondary focus. And all of a sudden, it's this pantheon suddenly of men, Zeus and Apollo. You know what I mean? It was all of a sudden what happened. That was never like that. Huh? What?
The clerical system was majority.
Yeah, I mean, it was, and it still is, essentially, to this day. I mean, the first complaint I hear from women about when we're talking about alchemy is like, where are all the women alchemists? Well, they were there. They just didn't get the press. And honestly, I think they were probably smarter or slicker, and that's why we don't know about them. But granted, we had some ridiculous figure like 20 or 30 million people were either burned at the stake, drowned, stoned to death, whatever, on charges of maleficent magic, witchcraft, practices other than what was acceptable, heresies and whatnot. Still to this day, the Gnostic church, the Gnostic belief, which, by the way, they didn't give themselves that name. That was given to them. They're bastardized there and thought of as like still a living part of a heresy of some sort. There never was a heresy. All they were about was like, okay, we're taking all of this information at its worth, and with our faith, they were pious. They believed in God, but they didn't believe that it had to be this control structure. They were there before the control structure took place, and when it did, they didn't agree with it. So they still wanted to continue to learn, and that was how you got closer to God, was to actually become wise, become more like the expanse of a God, rather than closing it. So that was the schism, but heresy, I don't think so. And the strange part is like the church also burned and killed a great many of their own highest, most learned priests and monks, and a couple of little flurries there. That wasn't necessary. It was a lot. There was an age of sort of martyrdom that was a thing. Martyrdom was a thing for a while. It was like people even chose it. In some instances.
This sort of has to do with controlling the dynamic.
Yeah. Isn't it funny, though, that someone would like sacrifice themselves for some? That to me is amazing. It's just suicide bombers. Still, we have them today too. That's all. It's all a religious thing, man.
But sometimes that's how you encourage people to act.
It's true. I mean, look, Gandhi, right?
Sorry, the crowd's going to go, oh no.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, who cared about some Indian guy rotting away in jail on a hunger strike? But Gandhi was willing to sacrifice himself in front of the cameras if it was going to move someone. And what's his name? The burning monk. I always forget his name too, and I have a really good memory. Something. Okay, the one who after Pol Pot had killed a bunch of monks. What do you call it? Shaman monks, Buddhist monks, trying to stamp out Buddhism in Vietnam. the monk who went into the busiest street in their town and poured gasoline, a whole 5 gallons on himself and set himself on fire. I mean, self-emulsification is a pretty extreme thing. And I mean, that's almost worse than martyrdom. At least you get to die a little quicker, unless you're burned at the stake. But yeah, that's brutal. That moved Kennedy so much that he changed his whole. He was so shocked by that, he immediately ordered a military coup to overthrow Pol Pot, because it was not what he was hoping for. I mean, this was the first Catholic Vietnamese leader, and at first that looked good, but not so Catholic as it turns out. He was, very violent and very anti-Buddhism. And the Buddhist monks, what do? They walk around in their temple. They don't bother anybody, but they were raiding them and burning them down and beating them and stuff like that. So yeah, and then 6 months later, Kennedy got killed. Strange. And I think it might have as much to do with that whole scenario, after trying 3 or 4 or 5 coups against other countries, that got him killed, as anything, whether it's the CIA or whatever. But we're off topic. So I think that's covering it. I just wanted to kind of breeze through those iterations and monikers of magic. I'm sure I'll come up with more, because there's always more. Abracadabra. Does anyone know what that means?
Sounds Arabic.
The origin is really unknown, but there is a similar two-phrase term, Avra, A-B-V-R-A, and then Kadabra. It's a little bit different. That was in ancient Hebrew mysticism, and it means, the Avra means I create. Avra, I create. And then Kadabra means as I speak. So abracadabra means I create as I speak. So anytime a magician, now it got sort of made into a pop culture thing when stage magicians, abracadabra, it made Mardi Gras, but originally it was not. Originally it was actually considered a very powerful word of conjuring, and it was when you were at the height of your ritual, in whatever magic work you were doing, that was the seal to it. Abracadabra, that was the final touch when you projected that energy, and that meant you were manifesting, you were going to create as you speak. So after you spoke the conjuring, you would say that at the end, and that would finish it. And today, in paganism, you say, so mote it be. Usually the crowd will say it back, or something to that effect. But there's a bunch of different stuff. Hopefully we can go, if the interest is there, I would be happy to go, and I have so much video footage, it's insane. Stuff that it's not available to the public, and I have a lot of literature and information that is not available to the public. Some of the stuff's been sort of published in books of traders and stuff like that have left societies, but I mean, there's some juicy stuff, and if you look at the true story of how some of this stuff came to be, it's really fascinating. It's really fascinating, and I mean, who doesn't believe in magic? Anyone? Everyone believe in magic? You don't have to.
Oh yeah, I'm kind of a skeptic.
Okay.
I don't
Good.
know.
Right. Well, good. Then that's great, and I hope that in some way, shape, or form, before this is over, you will believe in magic. My belief is that it exists as much as the human will and the human life force exists.
Doesn't it really kind of depend on how you define the word magic, though? You talked about that at the
Yes.
beginning.
Well, and there's many different definitions. That's true.
Yeah.
I don't
What you
practice.
said about what Crowley said about magic is using your will to manipulate the world around you.
But it's also things that happen normally. It's that miracle that happened right when you needed it. Something happened out of nowhere and came through for you, right? It's those happenstances in life where you're like, wow, that really worked out. Woof, right? That's magic too. That's when the alignment of forces just falls just right where you couldn't see it before. That's essentially magic. And what I'll get to in the end, hopefully, is that epigenetics is absolutely alchemical magic. Epigenetic structures and epigenetic function is governed, I mean, almost completely and solely by the things you experience, think, and live through in life. Trauma damages your epigenetic structure, weakens it, and actually causes unfavorable DNA signature. It allows disease, allows aging, allows the deterioration of the sort of coding that's outside the DNA structure. DNA strand is below the epigenetic structure. Epi meaning above, right? So epigenetics is the proteins, amino acids, and other molecular structures that govern the way your DNA expresses itself. Because DNA is DNA. Usually when there's some sort of serious, disease that you're born with, a congenital disease, it's usually stemming from an epigenetic deficiency that was inherited. These might not be heritable conditions, but at some point in the long history of from the single-celled organism to us, the epigenetic structure became altered in some way, and that's the problem. And if that can be identified and fixed, you're healthy. And that's what I was talking about extending human life, longevity in every way, even reversing aging and curing every disease. We're this close. And it's such a stupid thing too. It's like anything major in the world that happens, it turns out to be the stupidest thing. How could that be? That we already have everything in our bodies. Our bodies just are screwing up with using it. All we have to do is redirect some things and stimulate a couple of things, and we're 20 again. That's the reality. We now know this. We now know that we know what the process of dying looks like epigenetically, and if those particular changes were repaired in time, to where they didn't cause a chain reaction, you could essentially just repair every cell that dies. Not one by one. You influence the operation of non-coding RNA with your own stem cells, and it teaches the RNA how to once again create 20-year-old tissues and a perfectly healthy 20-year-old heart, because it did it before. It just forgot. That's the way our system is, sort of a linear system with a beginning and end. But it doesn't have to be. I mean, there's they've already cured many cancers with it. Lung cancer is almost a thing of the past now. Within the next few years, lung cancer will be not even a problem. You'll be able to go in the hospital for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and you'll be fine. They're growing everything now. I mean, they're growing all the organs have been. They can grow them now with your own stem cells. That's a good thing, is we don't need them from fetal tissue or placenta tissue anymore. We can get stem cells from our own spinal blood. So that's good. That ends a lot of the controversy. And so you can save yourself with your own stem cells and the right team of clinicians and doctors. You can cure. I mean, they haven't found the way to cure every disease, but they've targeted a few big ones and succeeded. And it was exactly the way they expected it to be. So epigenetics is really, epigenetics and quantum field dynamics is the magic of today. So we're going to work towards that. And I will see you guys next week, hopefully. And I'm thinking we'll probably have our 10 at least next week. Probably. It's not Super Bowl, none of that shit. So I'm gonna start going like my boss used to do in the morning. Like he would leave, must have left his house at 4 a.m. So he went to every crew's house and like banged on their door. Yeah, just we got work to do. And then he'd go on his rounds. We're like, oh God, go leave, and he'd be on to the next one, man, making sure every single person went to work. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna start like banging on people's email, like, hey. Start sending Alchemy messages every 15 minutes, like these ads that I get sent, this crap mail that I get. and just start sending stuff. You're gonna be there, right? Right. But no, it's been a good talk, a fun talk. And make sure, Rich, you bring your wife next time, and I'm gonna come up with something fun, and I might even do a little bit of magic for you. Now, what were you gonna say, Johnny?
I said the only way I made it was letting her.
I'm so glad you made it. Hey, if you gotta be a little bit late or whatever, or leave early, that's fine. You know what I mean? I tell people, if you gotta leave, just go ahead and leave. You're not gonna offend me. I'm just blabbing in my mouth anyway. But no, we got a ton of good stuff. And did you all get the Sumerian Kings List video? It's like hours and hours. It's like the comprehensive Sumerian King List history of Sumeria thing. No?
No.
All right, I'm gonna send a round out to you guys. If you can, watch some of that.
Send it on?
I'll send it in Messenger to you. Aiden.
All right.
I'll send a link, and it's amazing. I think it's 8 hours, so you don't have to watch all 8 hours of it. But I'm telling you, once you get into the first half hour, you won't be able to take your eyes off it. It's so interesting. I've seen a lot of them. People attempt them, and they get things all screwed up. I have sort of a window that they don't have because I studied so much with the Magick that I know these stories maybe a little bit better, some parts of it, than they do, the history tellers, because they make all these assumptions and they just hack through it, sort of. And some of the symbols they get wrong, some of the concepts they get wrong, beliefs even they get wrong. But for the most part, this one is pretty damn good. It's at least sequentially correct, and a lot of the it's sort of blending the Anunnaki, ancient astronaut theory into the actual history in a way that makes sense. Like I said, it makes as much sense as any other thing I've heard. You know what I mean? But it's interesting because it gives you a glimpse of like the pre-flood world, and none of our written history does that for us, really. Even biblical history doesn't quite do it. It's this vagueness there, but the Sumerian history gets in detail, and it talks about tens of thousands of years. So, and now we know that we've been here more than 10,000 years. I mean, we've been civilized sort of for more than 10, 20,000 years. We know it goes way back then. So, who knows? Were we ape men, and Enki turned us to wise humans with a genetic experiment? Maybe. Who knows? But we will get there, and it's great, fascinating stuff. So, thank you guys for coming. Have a good night.
Thank you.
And leave comments with the concierge.